Hi, I'm Whitney Espich, the CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I hope you enjoy this digital production created for alumni and friends like you.
So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining today's Career Lunch and Learn program, Shaping Work of the Future in a Post-COVID World. This is brought to you by the MIT Alumni Association and is sponsored in part by the MIT Federal Credit Union, MIT Professional Education, and MIT Sloan Executive Education. So, I'm Meghan Perdue. I'm the Digital Learning Fellow for the School of Humanities, Arts, and Social Sciences. Which means that I help to produce open online classes on edX. I help faculty use digital components in their campus teaching, and I also do research into best practices in online education. So I've been pretty busy the last few months. But I've had the distinct pleasure of working with Professor Kochan for the past 3 years on the edX course, Shaping Work of the Future, and I'll be serving as the moderator for today's program. As a reminder, this webinar is being broadcast live. So throughout the program, you can submit questions using the questions and answers feature in the Zoom toolbar. And for anyone joining via YouTube, you can ask questions to the comments field. And please feel free to ask questions throughout the program, but I'm just going to be collecting all of those for the end. So I'm pleased to introduce today's speaker, Professor Thomas Kochan. Tom is the George Maverick Bunker Professor of Management, Professor of Work and Employment Research, and the co-director of the MIT Sloan Institute for Work and Employment Research at the Sloan School of Management. His research focuses on work and employment policies, institutions, and practices, and particularly calls attention to the need for a new social contract of work, one that anticipates and engages current and future technological changes in ways that build a more inclusive economy and broadly shared prosperity. Very timely for the moment. He's also a member of the MIT Task Force on the Work of the Future. So Tom, thank you so much for agreeing to talk today, and over to you.
Well, thank you, Meghan, and thank you for all the important and good work that you do for us in both MITx and getting our courses up, but particularly in these last several months in helping MIT make the transition to online learning. You've been a real leader in that area, and we really appreciate it. So I'm delighted to join our alumni community members today to talk about something that obviously is really critical at the moment and affecting all of us. And that is, how are we together going to work to shape the future of work, particularly now in this world of COVID and beyond? And so that's really the topic today. A lot of us are working on this, and we want to see if we can't really make a contribution to moving forward in this world of work. Now, we'll have to move this forward too. There we go. So what I'd like to do is to use this opportunity to talk about how we can make work and our economy and our society more resilient, more productive, more fair and equitable and inclusive. And it's not just that it's coming on in the heels of this crisis, but this has been a set of issues that have been apparent to us and that we focused on in our teaching and our research here at MIT for quite a while. So I'll talk about how we might fill some of the holes in our safety net that we have observed and some of the void in worker voice that we've seen. I'll build on what we're doing on Work of the Future task force here on technology, and then talk a little bit more about how we can build a new social contract in this world of work. This picture is one that I use all the time when I talk about these issues, because it captures where we have come from and why there's so much frustration and concern in society, even before the COVID crisis. We have experienced what we call a broken social contract. That is, what do we expect out of work and employment? Well, from the end of World War II to about the late 1970s, about 1980, we had a social contract in the United States where wages went up as the economy got better. That's those two lines going together, productivity and wages growing about in tandem. Then, as you see, around 1980, these lines depart, and productivity continues to grow, but wages sort of go flat. That's why there's so much angst in our economy and our society. That's another way to picture the enormous inequality in incomes that we're experiencing, and why so many people today find themselves living from paycheck to paycheck. And when that paycheck gets disrupted, we see some of the consequences. So we really have to address this as a deep problem and as a long-term problem. But let's go beyond that. Just put us back in this old world of January 2020. What were we seeing then in the world of work? Well, we were pretty optimistic because we saw at least 5 years, really 7 years of solid job growth. The employers, had a hard time finding the talent that they needed, and that's a good problem for society. Tough problem for employers, for sure. Unemployment was at 3.5%, historic level that we haven't seen in many, many years. But we still had this persistent low wage growth. That continued to be a problem. And we had concerns and continue to have concerns about automation and how we address the advancing technologies in our economy. Then we had these massive tax cuts for business and a lot of optimism, but some disappointment. Yes, the stock market rose consistently, but most of those resources were used for stock buybacks and for dividends. They didn't filter on down to the workforce as we had hoped. At the same time, we've been seeing across the country more and more signs of worker protests. Our own research shows an increased interest in joining unions today, and workers want to have a stronger voice at work, and we knew this going into this crisis. The encouraging thing is the Business Roundtable began to see the need for change as well. And they announced almost a year ago now, not quite a year ago, that they believe corporations need to pay much more attention to the multiple stakeholders rather than just their shareholders. So there was some momentum moving forward. And then here comes the crisis. What are the kinds of implications that we're drawing, that I believe we can draw from the crisis? Now, we're still in early stages of this, and there's a lot more to learn, but I think some things are very, very apparent. First of all, we have to worry about the problem of losing one's health insurance when you lose one's job. Now, I'm not arguing for single payer. I'm not arguing for a particular solution, but this problem now has become so much more apparent, and we've got to find ways to incrementally solve that as we move forward. It's time also that we recognize we were the last democratic country in the world not to have a national sick leave and paid family leave program. And we've had to implement something on an emergency basis. We're going to have to learn from the experience there and move forward to fix that problem on a permanent basis, because we are so vulnerable to these kinds of shocks, and families are so vulnerable, especially, as I'm going to talk a little later, all of our emergency workers who are out there on the front lines. We have to worry also about how we continue employment. We have turned to unemployment and expanding unemployment insurance as our solution, where other countries in Europe, particularly Germany and then Scandinavia, have emphasized short hours, reducing hours of work, but keeping people employed so that they can come back faster when the time is right to rebuild our economies. We need to learn from our European partners on that and find ways to encourage more short hours of work rather than turning to unemployment. But we did have to expand unemployment to cover those in the gig economy and those in short hours. And so we need to learn that this is something we have to address as well. This is a moment where we can expand our training efforts. We are in the midst of the biggest redeployment of workers in our economy since World War II. We're seeing shortages in some places because people can't go to work or are afraid to go to work. And we're seeing unemployment in many others. And as we come back, we're going to need to find ways to make sure that we help people find those jobs, have the skills training. We should be using our time right now to increase training opportunities for everyone. I'll come back to that later. And then finally, on this safety net issue, we have excluded immigrants. we need immigrants in our labor force at all levels, from entry-level service employees in agriculture, in hospitality, in restaurants, in healthcare, as well as high-level immigrants in education, in research, in entrepreneurship. And yet those people who fear that they may be deported now or are not extended the same benefits are left out of this safety net. I think we need to learn from this experience and rethink our policies with respect to immigration in the long run, but in the short run, we should deal with these issues. An issue close to home for me, because I study about worker voice and how we give workers a stake in addressing the problems that they experience at the workplace. I think there's two steps that we need to take. First, this issue of how do we care for those who are out there doing the emergency work for us now in healthcare, in food preparation, in hospitality, and in the grocery stores, in our food chain supply, in our farming communities. These people are doing the work that we need to survive as a society, and yet they are unprotected in many ways. And so we need to make sure that all of them have a voice, that managers are listening to them, talk to them, make sure that their voices on how to make their workplaces safe are being heard. So I think we should extend a right to consultation, safety committees, some mechanism to make sure that they have a voice in this process right now. And we should be working on an industry base. As we bring back meatpacking, for example, it shouldn't just be the government saying that they should come back. It should be industry and labor working together to figure out what are the conditions under which they should come back and work safely so that they can continue to supply us with all of our needs. That's where we need to go right now. And we should all demand that our governors and our employers and our labor organizations and our workforce itself work together on this. But in the long run, we also have to fix our labor policies so that this doesn't happen again. We don't find workers without a voice because our unions have declined. We need to find ways to bring works councils, consultation mechanisms, maybe representation of workers on boards of directors, and industry-based strategies where labor and management are working together to find solutions to their critical problems. This was a problem beforehand. It's a problem that we need to fix. In addition, here at MIT, we spend a lot of time on work of the future, this task force that the president and provost set up that I'm privileged to be a part of with great colleagues from all across the Institute. And what we are saying is that we need to move from an idea that technology is just going to push its way into our workplace and solve problems to what we're seeing today and what we're emphasizing in our own work, that technology can be a great problem-solving source if we first define what problems need to be resolved and then ask our great technology experts and innovators to find solutions. And we're seeing that across the country with the redeployment of all kinds of resources to better provide the healthcare materials and equipment and the PPE and the testing that's so badly needed, and finding vaccines. This is an example of technology and science being put to work in deployment of a particular set of critical societal problems. We need to pull technology toward our problems, not be victims of technology pushing us to some imagined solution that isn't well linked to the critical problems in our society. Another example is the wonderful use of broadband and software to experiment with online learning, something that we're doing a lot of here at MIT, and we can build on. Let's use these technologies to solve our problems. And then let's use the educational online resources that we've developed here at MIT. Open courseware, our executive education programs, not only in Sloan, but across the Institute. Our MITx program that we teach in to support lifelong learning, because we have to extend the reach of MIT from our students on campus and our graduate students to the alumni, to people in the workforce in general, all across the world, because we have to recognize that the world today requires consistently updating, upskilling, reskilling all of us to keep current so that we can meet the needs of the future and we can keep our careers moving forward effectively. I'm particularly interested in what do we need to teach the workforce out there about how advancing technologies will affect their work so that they can add value and help give wisdom to these machines as they are being brought into their workplace. And I'm going to suggest to everyone and invite all of you to join an exercise that we have in our course to build a new social contract. What do we mean by that? Well, we think that the way to move forward in this future of work is to bring all of the interest groups together and all of the parties who need to contribute to the future of work. Employers, for sure, because they have the resources and they are the innovators and they're the ones who employ our workforce. Entrepreneurs, because they're the source of new ideas, and the technology developers, because they are so critical to the future of work. The education sector that we're part of, we have given the importance of education and the need for more skills. We have a more important role to play, perhaps, than we have in the past, and we are trying to do that. And certainly government has to play a unifying role, bring us together as we have in other periods of national crisis during World War II and other such situations. We have to have a government at the state and at the national level that brings all of these stakeholders together, including labor and workforce advocates, so that we can work together to find solutions. And we do an exercise in our online course that is called Shaping the Future or Shaping Work of the Future. There's a link there. We're inviting you all to join it. It's self-paced and you can pick it up anytime you would like. But we're also going to put a social contract exercise online very, very soon, where we're going to invite you to participate in the process of building a new social contract. What do you expect of business? What do you expect of labor? What do you expect of government and education to contribute to a better world of work? And we're going to offer you opportunities to enter your ideas, to vote on what our participants in the course have already suggested, and take this out to the public so that together as a society, we can shape the future of work together. So those are some thoughts. We can come back to some things that are going on here at MIT if we want to at some point, but I want to turn it back to Meghan at this point to see if there's anything else that we should be talking about right now, or perhaps to really engage questions and your thoughts in this process. So thank you for the opportunity to share what we are doing here at MIT, some ideas about how we can mobilize all of the talent here to move forward. Meghan?
Sure. We had one question just now I think is a good to touch on, which is like, could you say more about what you mean by the social contract and sort of like what will be done with it? Like,
Sure. When we use the term social contract, what we're saying is, what do we expect at work from employers, from workers, from labor organizations, from government, to make a workplace and a set of work outcomes that are responsive to the interests of all of the parties in society. Certainly employers depend on having a productive workforce. The workforce depends on having a good job, a meaningful job where they are respected and they can use their full talents. And our communities and our societies both support work and help regulate work, but also depend on it. So what we use this term social contract, which we borrow from political philosophers like Jean-Jacques Rousseau and others, to say what's our responsibilities of each of these stakeholders to make this workplace productive, fair, and equitable and inclusive of all people who depend on it. And so the exercise and the process is, let's have a collaborative discussion among these various parties to figure out how we update our practices, our policies, our institutions, our approaches to make sure that we're addressing all of these interests. And the exercise allows people to enter ideas for how to do so.
Great. And another question is, so an example of what MIT is doing to help workers during this time?
Well, let me draw then on one that I'm involved in with colleagues here at MIT and in the Sloan School, and I list the leaders of this effort: Kate Kellogg, a colleague in our Work and Organization Studies group; Simon Johnson, one of our leading economists at Sloan; Retzef Levy, who's in operations management. He's one of the leading world's leading experts in how to use big data and modern advanced analytic techniques and analysis to optimize the use of resources in our economy. And they created this thing that's called the MIT COVID Alliance, and then turned to some of us in the workforce area as we began to focus on the need to address the critical issues we see in our senior care or nursing care facilities in Massachusetts. But clearly this is a national problem. It's just tragic to see the number of deaths of people coming in these facilities for reasons we can understand. But the problem is that there are large staffing vacancies in these nursing homes in Massachusetts. You see the number here, about 40%. That number has actually gone up in the last week or so, because people are afraid to go to work. There are many, many people who are sick and can't go to work. And so we've got to find a way to backfill that workforce. And so we're putting a lot of our energy together, working with the Massachusetts Senior Care Association, working with the union that's involved, the Service Employees Union in the state here, working with the state government to help recruit more people back into the industry, going out to some of the immigrant communities like the Haitian community that staffs is a source of staffing for many nursing homes, working with monster.com to find ways to match applicants to the workplace, offering a signing bonus, providing new training with some of our labor market intermediaries that are very skilled in this area to make sure people are ready to go to work there, providing increased compensation. The state has kicked in $130 million to increase compensation so that we can better attract people and retain them. And then worrying about how we make sure that when we go to work, that there's a proper testing and equipment and infection control practices and workplace practices where workers have an input into the process, and other provisions like sick leave and family leave and so on. So we're all working together, and that's MIT at its best. And I want to really applaud the work of our leaders working on this, those of us on the faculty who are working on it. We've brought some of our PhD students into it. It's the best of MIT, trying to bring our resources to bear in support of people on front lines dealing with a big problem.
Related to this sort of filling vacancies and finding jobs, a attendant asked if you had any advice for those who will be unemployed about sort of the best sectors to find jobs or the best ways to be more employable in the future.
Well, that's a really important question. I think that, as I said, there's going to be a lot of redeployment. The most important thing that one can do right now is to invest time and energy into advancing your skills. Follow your interest. Look at what kinds of things you can do online. There's lots of MIT resources online, but online resources from universities through edX and other programs like that around the world. Take as much advantage as you can of time that you might have available to retool in your own field or to branch out into new ones. There's going to be enormous growth in healthcare in the future. There's no question that we're going to see even more rapid demand for healthcare professionals and workers at all levels than we have seen before, even though that was a growing sector. I also believe that we are going to see new opportunities in, I guess, what I would call the supply chain area. That is, we're recognizing that globalization and global supply chains have lots of advantages, but lots of vulnerabilities. So we're going to see more opportunities to bring work back into the United States, not in a way just to create jobs here, but to make our supply chains more resilient. Anything that one can do to figure out ways to do that more effectively, I think there's going to be high demand. And I think there's going to be a high demand for a lot of local services. I am deeply concerned about the impacts of this crisis on small business. We are going to lose many small businesses, and it's really sad. And I applaud the government's efforts to provide loans and so on, and that's helping some, but it's not going to reach enough. And so we're going to see the need to rebuild the small business sector in services that make our local economies a bit more resilient than they have been in the past. And so I would look at opportunities along those lines as well. And the final thing I would say is I think we're going to see a growth in some of the smaller communities. I think we're going to see more people recognize that that there is a need to not just be so concentrated in our very large metropolitan areas, but we're going to see technology and we're going to see jobs move into adjacent communities, maybe a little bit more distant and a little smaller and a little bit more lower cost. And so I think looking for opportunities in those sectors to build those economies, to expand broadband, make sure that people have the services and skills that they need in those areas is another opportunity.
So we've had a couple of questions I'm going to kind of consolidate into one. A number of people have pointed out that you have a lot of really good ideas, and they're wondering how or what MIT or you, and I'm going to put in also the task force, is doing to sort of promote these ideas at the policy level, like reaching out to policymakers or influencers, and sort of like what recommendations are you guys making or hope to make, and sort of more about these efforts.
Well, I appreciate that, and I would I'll answer that, but I also want to encourage all of our alumni to do exactly what the question is asking us to do. Take these ideas. These are ideas that reflect my particular view of what needs to happen, but they're shared. They're not just my ideas. They're really our community here at MIT, where we have a really good group of people thinking about the future of work, and take them to your local representatives. Have discussions with them. Really push hard for them to take these actions to fill the holes in our safety net, to rebuild worker voice, to bring our society interest groups together, and to say we have to unify in this time of crisis, and we have to build that support going forward. But on a specific basis here in the task force, we are writing briefing papers. I'm working on a final draft of one on worker voice. We are going to be offering policy ideas moving forward over the next several months. We will be working with people running for office, people in office. We're not taking a partisan view of one candidate or another, but we're going to make all of this information available. Some of us are working hard with our representatives to get these ideas across. I think there's so much potential to do this at the local and state level. So while federal government policymakers might be stalemated or very, very divided, our governors, Republicans and Democrats, are doing a wonderful job. Most of them, and you know, we all have our favorites, and we all have some that we are concerned about. But by and large, they are demonstrating the importance of state government, and our mayors and our community leaders are demonstrating the importance of local government. Go to them with these ideas. They are our best advocates. Working on this healthcare set of issues, we need a strong state government initiative here, and I think we are getting it from our governor and from the administration here in Massachusetts. So we're trying to help them. We're trying to take those ideas forward. We're working with leaders at the national level. There's a lot of thinking about what we need to do coming out of this as we open up our economy and do it safely. And so we're doing our best to get our voices heard in various places, but we need your help, and you should be the voice of MIT as the alumni out there with your connections. And anytime you need resources from us, don't hesitate to ask, because we're more than willing to do what we can. I spend a lot of time with the media. We just got new unemployment insurance numbers, claims out this morning, and I've got various media people I've got to talk with this afternoon about what those numbers mean and where we are going. So we try to be responsive wherever we can, but encourage you to do so as well.
Another couple of questions asking if there's any examples of countries sort of successfully renegotiating their social contracts or implementing these ideas successfully.
Well, I think we can learn a lot from what's happening in two different parts of the world, in Europe and in Singapore. Singapore is obviously a very different country than ours, but so are the European countries. But we still can listen, look, learn. Germany, for example, the first thing that Chancellor Merkel did was to reach out to industry leaders and to the labor leaders in that country and say, we need to work together. They call themselves social partners in Europe, and they basically put in place or activated a policy they already had for short work hours that worked well during the Great Recession of 2007 to 2009. They experimented then, and they brought their economy back faster because they kept people employed and provided everyone, not everyone, but industry emphasized everybody reducing their hours, taking somewhat of a pay cut as opposed to unemployment. And then the policy of the state was to provide resources to close some of that gap between what the salary was and what the reduced time provided. And they asked then industry and labor to work together to make this work across the industries that you find in Germany, because the government can't do it alone. And these, quote, social partners have been doing a very good job of that. Now they are negotiating, talking about how do you bring big companies like Volkswagen and Siemens and others back to work in a way that makes sure that they attend to the safety issues, they manage it together, and they move forward. Now, that doesn't mean that it's perfect, and doesn't mean that everybody is included in that, and it doesn't mean that there aren't some conflicts, but they're working them through. And that's, I think, a good example. Singapore, while again, it's a very small country, and it's obviously a bit more controlled than we have in terms of our values and so on. But Singapore too has been very active in working with industry because it had a good base of working with industry and a good base of working with the labor organizations in that country to work in a tripartite way to say, all right, we're going to shut down some activities quickly, we're going to come back faster, and we're going to work together to make sure that we are taking care of the various needs. And I think those countries that unify in that way have a lot of lessons for us to learn how we can do it. And we are capable of doing it. All we need is the leadership to bring us together.
So switching to thinking about the impact of technology on work, we've had a couple of questions about the interface between human work and technology in the workplace. And another person specifically talked about how technology could perhaps help in the sector of healthcare, like help address some problems of disparities in health outcomes.
Good question. So let me speak to this interaction between technology and the people doing the work, because as Megan knows, this is something that I've worked on a lot over the years, and we teach pretty intensively in our course. And it's not just me; it's our task force on work of the future, our best roboticists, our best artificial intelligence experts, manufacturing technology experts, as well as those of us who focus on work, are coming to understand the same thing, and that is we've got to integrate the technologies with the workplace practices, with the way in which we organize for work, with the ideas of workers having an input into that technology. That's where the evidence is, whether it's auto industry, healthcare, airlines, or other industries. That's where we get the highest level of rate of return on technology, the highest level of productivity and innovation, and the best augmenting of work that we see across the economy. Typically, and this is what we mean between technology push and technology pull, typically we see a kind of a push approach. That is, somebody gets a good idea, a vendor comes to a CEO in a business and says, I have a technology solution for your problems. That they buy the technology, then they try to figure out how it applies to their organization. Then they bring the workforce in. By that time, there's resistance and it's very slow. And often there has to be a redo of the technology to make it really work effectively. Instead, what we need is this pull approach. That is, let's let business leaders, let's let societal leaders, as we are now in this setting, to say, we've got a healthcare crisis. Can you help us bring your technological expertise to bear on these problems? And then let's make sure that we bring the specialists, the experts in the way in which work is done, the way in which we distribute protective gear and equipment, the way in which we can use 3D printing to produce masks and other kinds of things and then distribute them, integrate them with the way in which work is done. And we're seeing all kinds of applications in the healthcare sector and in others for how technology can be part of our solution. But it's always integrating the workforce, listening to their ideas, engaging them in the early stages of design and implementation so that it's responsive to the problems that they have in getting the work done. That's the method that we need to make the norm in introducing technology. That's what we're emphasizing in this task force on work of the future. You're going to see more of us writing about that as the task force moves forward. And we're seeing a lot of this in healthcare, certainly in the efforts to bring more protective gear into the workplace, to find ways to find new sources of supply, to use, as I said, 3D printing to produce some of this equipment, to redeploy the factories from making cars to making the equipment that we need, the ventilators and others, to other examples like that. So that's the best use of technology. And the best use of that requires integrating and working together between the technologists, the engineers, and the frontline workers and managers who know how the work is done.
So I have a very easy question. Someone asked if they could just see the first screen of the presentation.
Oh, I think I can get back to that. Is that what we're looking for?
Yeah, I think they were looking for our contact information, but it's not actually on there. But I think it's pretty easy to find us on the MIT.
Yeah, just look at the MIT website or Google us, but it's just email is just my first initial and last name at mit.edu. And Megan, I think yours is very, very similar.
Yeah. Also, first initial, last name, MIT.edu. And the recordings will be available on the YouTube page in about a week. Another question, but so I was thinking again about small businesses in particular. I've had a couple of questions. One is thinking about how would you advise small business owners sort of on this near-term future we're looking at with coronavirus, so sort of this like opening and shutting period, and how to address this in the next year or so. And another is asking about kind of like how can we upskill small businesses, small business owners, particularly like upskill and also like to get them the their technological needs met to be able to move their businesses online if possible. It seems like a number of small businesses are struggling to move their business online because of probably educational and technological barriers.
Sure. Those are close to my heart. I have a son. One of our sons owns several small restaurants in Amherst, Massachusetts, and so we're talking all the time about exactly these issues. But he's not alone. He's part of the small business community that's really, really struggling on how to do this. The first thing is to recognize the pressures that small business is under, and to, as customers, to remember these businesses as we start to allocate our purchases and our come back into the market and to support them. The second thing that we need to do, and they need to do, is to be very careful as they bring people back in to their organizations. So let me again use my son's example as a restaurant owner. He's gone to take out very, very early in the process and is doing a really good job of providing takeout services and food to people in his community. And that's helped him to stabilize as best he can. Now he has the small loan fund that he can bring more of his workforce back. But as he does that, he has to be very careful that he makes sure that they are safe, they're healthy, that they are tested, that they don't cause more illness in his organization. And I think this is something that all small business leaders need to do, to work with their community resources, because they can't do the testing, but to make sure that that their employees are safe, and talk to their employees, make sure that they are comfortable coming back. They will be the best judges of whether it's appropriate for them to come back, because they know their own family and contact circumstances. And then to make sure that as we bring them back, that we continue to attend to their family and sick leave needs, because these family needs are going to continue for a long time with kids at home trying to do online learning, working with their schools and so on. This is adding a very different role for business. And we're going to have to find more accommodations and scheduling and more ways to meet these needs. So those are some of the things that small businesses need to do. They also need, I think, to rethink their business models. So I agree that many are going to have to find new ways to go online. And so reach out to their local chamber of commerce. Here in Boston, and at Sloan, we have had a leadership program with the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce for now, I think it's about 8 or 9 years. And so mid-career leaders, the next generation of very high-level executives in the Boston area, come to Sloan for leadership training. And partly that's to build that network. Yes, we can provide some leadership education and skills, but the real value is they're building networks of relationships with each other. These are resources that small business can go to their local chamber of commerce and say, can you help us to think through how we adapt our business model? You will find in Boston, and I think you will find across the country, resources like that that are willing to work with small business because they know how important they are to the community. As we do that, we as a society have to expand broadband so that all across the country, in our rural areas, in our small cities, in our inner cities, that internet access is strong and viable for all of these businesses, because the demand for this internet capacity is going to just grow and multiply. So we're going to have to invest more in making sure that everybody has the technical resources, the business management and innovation resources, the advice that's coming there, and then also making sure that we're caring for the workforce as we bring them back, so that they don't put our businesses at risk, our customers at risk, and themselves at risk.
Sort of thinking about some of these ideas for helping support small businesses and also help everyone through this COVID time. It's like going to be very expensive, as we've talked about. A lot of states are already concerned about being able to pay for all of these benefits. And then there's also been a number of questions in the comment section about how will we pay for these ideas coming out of the new social contract. Just sort of like thinking about like who will bear the costs, or how we will structure these things.
Right now, the most important thing we can do is invest. Interest rates are obviously at historic lows again, and they're going to stay there for quite a while. The Federal Reserve is doing the right thing in keeping them very, very low. And we are going to have to invest as a nation in order to provide the resources to bring people back to work and to keep families stable and healthy over the next several years. There's no question that's going to increase our deficit, but that's an investment. If we don't make those, we will then have a bigger expenditure in terms of dealing with the healthcare and the financial crises and that families are experiencing, and we won't have the purchasing power restored in our economy that's going to be necessary to build a more vibrant economy going forward and to pay these debts. So I think it's time to invest. And at the same time, as we move forward, we are going to have to rethink our tax structure. We did have a massive tax cut for business and for higher income folks. Many of us benefited from that. And I think we're going to have to revisit that going forward and find a bit more of a fair tax burden, so that we can pay for some of these investments going forward. That's a reality. We can't leave it to the state and local governments. They will go bankrupt. The unemployment insurance funds are going to run out and going to have to be backed up with federal dollars, as we have in other deep recessions. That's a reality. There's nothing we can do but support that, because we can't let them just be exhausted, and then we have more and more problems and a slower recovery in the long run. So there's no free lunch here. This is going to be expensive. It's going to be an investment. But remember, we invested this way during World War II to meet an international crisis and a crisis of national security. And then after World War II, we had the fastest growth in consumer demand and rebuilding the economy that we have experienced in any time in that century. And so there will be dividends if we invest wisely now, and we will rebuild the economy and get the resources to pay for it as we go along.
And one person asked if that would include 5G technology for broadband.
Oh, absolutely. I'm speaking way outside my area of expertise. But I've heard our good friend and colleague, Sanjay Sharma, who is an expert on this, and he is a very, very strong proponent of 5G technologies. He thinks it's exactly, well, no, it's exactly, but it's clearly the right approach for the next generation. but we have to do it in a sensible way. And Sanjay is eloquent on this, and maybe he will be writing some things. I think he is writing something on this right now, and would make for a very good lunchtime seminar, perhaps, just on that topic, on how do we make sure that we use the technology of 5G to disseminate it broadly and appropriately across the world, so that we don't have big debates about what's the right standard and companies competing with each other over trying to monopolize on the 5G. Instead, let's make sure that we have internationally accepted standards. And then, of course, companies can compete on how well they can provide this technology. And so I think it's an exciting area. It's beyond my expertise, but I learned from my colleagues who are experts, and I'm very optimistic about it.
So this is another question that I think Sanjay also thinks a lot about. This is Sanjay Sarma, if any of you don't know who we're talking about. He's the for president, vice president, is that his title, of Open Learning?
Yes, he's the head of Open Learning.
Yeah, the head. How do we handle retraining for workers who are in jobs that are sort of disappearing? So it's like traditionally you think of the coal miner, there's a lot of these kind of jobs that are disappearing. And how do we sort of bridge those gaps from workers that have a certain set of skills into jobs that are growing?
Well, this gets much closer to the work I do, but a colleague of mine, Paul Osterman, who's our leading national expert on training, just wrote an op-ed that we can perhaps post as well on the need for a GI Bill for training. We know that we can invest in training and make those investments pay off if it's long-term, if it's high quality, and if it links between, let's say, online learning or classroom learning and on-the-job learning. And so we need to provide more public resources. We need, as individuals, to use our time now to, as I said earlier in this conversation, to use the online resources that are available to invest at the workplace. Some of the best investments in training are in apprenticeship programs and in joint programs that companies and unions provide. For example, in healthcare, many people in union management settings at Kaiser Permanente is a very big healthcare operation that's highly unionized, to other smaller places, even here in Massachusetts, have a joint training fund where people can start as medical assistants and move and use those funds to invest in training opportunities to perhaps become a certified nursing assistant or an LPN, and then eventually even moving up to the RN positions. We need more of that blends training that's provided in educational institutions, either online or in person, with what's going on in the workplace, because that tailors that to the needs of the workplace, to the modern technologies that are out there, to the real shortages and the real needs, and provides a link to real jobs and career opportunities. So we need the equivalent, as Paul has written, the equivalent of a GI Bill, as we had at the end of World War II, to invest in training, to provide tax incentives and support for training and retraining as technologies change.
So those are two questions that I'm gonna merge together, though they're a little disparate. But it's sort of, how can we take the lessons we're learning from this quarantine into the future, particularly lessons around working from home or flexible work, and then also around climate change and climate mitigation policies?
Well, they are related, as we've all seen by watching TV or internet comparisons of cities before COVID and during COVID, how clear the skyline becomes, and things that you couldn't even see, mountains in the background in some of our big cities, that illustrate the impact that all of the travel and the commuting and all of business activities have created more pollution in our cities that seems to have dissipated some. Well, that's a lesson. We have to invest in, we're not going to stop working, and clearly we can do more work from home. More of us have learned how to do online teaching, and more of us have learned how to use this technology that we're using this afternoon to talk with each other, to solve problems, to reach new markets with our products and services, and to take advantage of that. So we need to build on these lessons and see what else we can do from distributed ways, distributed areas. That's why I'm excited about what I predict, and I could be wrong, but I predict we're going to see more people move to rural and smaller areas if there's good broadband, if there's good internet services, so that they can take advantage of some of these tools of online work. And so we ought to continue to develop those options. I do believe that we also have to be very sensitive to this. It's easy for me to say, gee, this is possible to do my job sitting in front of a screen here in my study, and maybe be almost as effective in teaching and in communicating with the outside world through these tools. But that doesn't mean that the bus drivers, the people in manufacturing, the people in the grocery stores and in healthcare can do this. They have to be on site, in person. And so we have to worry about the inequalities that we might not otherwise be sensitive to. That when people have to work, they also have to be safe, and we have to provide more flexibility for them to do their scheduling to match their needs and the needs of the workplace. So I think the lessons here are, let's expand and let's learn from how we can do more of this work this way, creatively and productively, and find ways to distribute this broadly in our society. Let's learn from the lower levels of pollution that we have observed, and let's find ways to keep our cities healthier, and to try to invest in all of the climate control or pollution control technologies wherever it's possible. Let's expand that, but then let's also be sensitive to those people who the only way they can work is by going to a specific workplace and interacting in person. And we got to make sure that we're treating them fairly, and that we're elevating their compensation and their security and their access to the benefits of sick leave and family leave, like the rest of us are fortunate to have in the work that we do.
Great. Well, I think that's all the time that we have. We only have a few moments left for this, so I'm just going to start with the wrap up. But Tom, thank you so much for this presentation. It was a lot of fun. It was really great to get everyone's questions and feel like we had a lot of conversation here. And we also talked on a lot of the topics that we cover in our online class. So if you're particularly interested in these issues and you want to see more experts sort of weigh in on them, we interview a lot of MIT faculty in the course that sort of expand on this further. But the MIT Alumni Association thanks you for taking the time to be with us and sharing your work with MIT alumni and around the world. Thank you, Tom. I'd also like to thank the alumni viewers for tuning in. As a reminder, the webinar will be on the Alumni Association YouTube channel under the Career Lunch and Learn playlist, and that will be available about a week from today. And if you have any questions, you can email the team at alumnicareers@mit.edu. So thank you guys so much for your awesome questions. I hope you have a great day. So take care.
Thanks for joining us. And for more information on how to connect with the MIT Alumni Association, please visit our website.